On the day the Liu family came to the orphanage to choose an adopted son, all the children gathered around them, hoping to be selected and change their fate to become a wealthy heir. However, I wasn't interested and fell asleep in the wardrobe. I thought I could escape the tragic destiny of my previous life, becoming the Liu family's adopted son and eventually marrying Victoria, that Yandere girl. But when I woke up, I saw Victoria standing in front of the wardrobe door. She smiled sweetly and said, "Little brother, stop hiding. I'm here to take you home." When I saw Victoria's face before me, I thought I was still trapped in that nightmare until the director called out to me, "Sincere, why are you sleeping here?" Only then did I realize everything wasn't a dream. Seeing me frozen in place, the director pulled me out of the wardrobe. She helped straighten my collar and pushed me in front of Mr. and Mrs. Williams, saying, "You were asleep, and Miss Victoria insisted we shouldn't wake you. Everyone has been waiting for you." The mentioned Victoria was standing in front of her parents, wearing a faint smile as she looked at me. The current Victoria seemed different from the one in my memories, who was always cold towards me. She took the initiative to greet me. "Hello, Sincere." For some reason, when she called my name Sincere, it felt strangely unsettling. I frowned and avoided her gaze, but wondered in my heart, they could have chosen anyone else. Why did they have to wait for me? I asked, "What are you waiting for me for?" The director bent down and explained, "They want to adopt you. Sincere will have a family now, with a father, mother, and sister." The usually stern director showed me a rare smile at this moment. I guess she was happy for me. Children in orphanages are lucky to be adopted, but the director didn't know that I had been reborn. I already knew the Liu family would come to the orphanage today to choose an adopted son, which is why I deliberately hid in the wardrobe. Mrs. Elizabeth took my hand and said gently, "Sincere, would you like to come home with us? Victoria has always wanted a brother to protect her." This scene was exactly the same as in my previous life. Scenes from my previous life flashed through my mind like slides. I immediately pulled my hand back and looked up at the director, saying, "Director, I don't want to be adopted by them." As soon as I said this, everyone was surprised. Victoria had the strongest reaction. She frowned and asked me why. I replied expressionlessly, "Because I don't want to be your brother." Despite my rejection, Victoria showed no signs of anger on her face. Instead, her tone became more docile, with a hint of barely noticeable submission. She said, "Then you don't have to be my brother. Just come back to the Liu family and live with us, okay?" The director quietly tugged at my sleeve, but still couldn't stop me from rejecting Victoria again. I flatly refused, "No." I thought Victoria would give up, but when the director asked Mr. and Mrs. William if they wanted to choose another boy, Victoria suddenly cried out. She said, "Mom, I want him." She said only he looked the most like her brother. In my previous life, Victoria chose me among many boys also because I looked somewhat similar to her brother. At that time, knowing I was chosen, I felt heaven truly favored me. I was taken back to the Liu family, renamed Liu Boda, and had my own room in the huge mansion. Even though that room didn't truly belong to me, I was content. Mrs. Elizabeth said that orphanage children inevitably had a lower class manner and couldn't present themselves properly in society. So I changed my old habits and became increasingly unlike myself. Mrs. Elizabeth was strict with me, requiring me to practice piano for over 12 hours daily. Even though the teacher explicitly said I had no talent for piano, Mrs. Elizabeth still accompanied me in practice every day. But some things can't be forced. I would say, "I'm sorry, Mom, I still can't play well." Every time I apologized, Mrs. Elizabeth would look at me with even more patience and comfort me. She would say, "It's okay. As long as Sincere tries hard, you'll definitely play well eventually." Later, I found out that playing piano was the hobby of Mrs. Elizabeth's deceased son. Her treatment of me was nothing more than seeking another person's shadow in me. But I didn't care about these things. A fish lacking water won't care whether the water it gets is clean or not. It just needs to survive. Water to a fish, a mother to me. Having one was enough. I tried harder to learn piano, tried harder to make Mother happy. We became more and more like a real mother and son. Until at Victoria's engagement party, Victoria and I were drugged. When Mr. Williams saw Victoria and me afterward, He fainted from anger. Mrs. Elizabeth slapped me across the face, saying, "I should never have brought you to our family." Victoria looked at me with tears in her eyes, but there was an emotion I couldn't understand flashing in them. But I think she probably regretted it too, regretted choosing me as her brother. I said I really don't know what happened. I didn't drug my sister. I tried to explain for myself, but no one believed me. So much so that later, when Victoria betrayed me countless times, betrayed our marriage, she would always say, "You even used drugs to make me marry you back then. Everything now is your retribution." Victoria hated me, so after marriage she always liked to slap my face in public, humiliating me. Many people in our social circle were betting on how long our marriage would last. People said, "At most a year. Once the child is born, Victoria will leave him." Unfortunately, the result was beyond everyone's expectations. Victoria and I were entangled for 19 years, and even after my death, the words "beloved wife Victoria" were still engraved on my tombstone. The director asked, "Sincere, tell me, why don't you want to be adopted by the Liu family?" After Victoria left with her parents, the director called me to her office. After a long silence, I casually found an excuse, saying, "I don't want to leave you and everyone else." The director sighed and urged me to think it over carefully. I knew she wanted the best for me, hoping I could have a better life. But I didn't want to repeat the same mistakes, nor did I want to have any connection with Victoria again. However, a big fire that night broke all my plans. In the hospital, I coldly looked at Victoria and questioned, "You started the fire." Victoria hurriedly explained, "No, the fire department has already confirmed it was caused by aging electrical wires." After saying this, the corners of her mouth turned slightly downward, and she said in a sad tone, "Sincere, why do you think of me like this?" In this life, I had only met her 2 or 3 times, but Victoria's attitude toward me had an inexplicable familiarity. Victoria stared at me, her eyes full of hope as she said, "I just want to help you. As long as you agree to come home with me, my mother will help pay for the director's medical treatment." The director had suffered severe burns while trying to save us during the fire at the orphanage last night. I let out a cold laugh and mocked, "This is the first time I've heard someone make threats sound so fresh and elegant." Victoria didn't defend herself, only saying softly, "Sincere, it's okay if you don't want to be my brother, just as long as you're willing to come to our home." Her submissive, almost begging tone made me very curious. I asked, "Why do you insist on me coming to the Liu family?" Victoria said, "Because my mom has been really missing my brother lately, and you look very similar to my brother. I want to ask you to keep my mom company." I was half skeptical of her words. Victoria was acting too abnormally. How could the formerly spoiled and willful young lady say such things? I asked her, "Is that all?" Victoria hesitated for a moment before nodding and responding, "Yes, that's all." Although I didn't want to get involved with Victoria, the director was still lying in the hospital bed. On the way to the Liu house, Victoria kept trying to talk to me, but I remained silent. She probably knew she was annoying, so she softened her voice and tried to justify herself. She said, "The Liu family can provide you with better conditions. It's better than staying at the orphanage no matter what. Sincere, don't blame me, okay? I'm doing this for your own good." Victoria had said these words in my previous life too. Victoria hated me for most of her life, and it wasn't until I was about to die that her attitude toward me softened somewhat. But by then I was already beyond medical help, with only an orange cat for company. When Victoria suddenly came back to the mansion to see me that time, just because the big orange cat suddenly jumped out and startled her, she threw away the cat I had kept for half a year. I weakly asked her, "Why?" She rolled her eyes at the time and said, "You're really ungrateful. I'm doing this for your own good. Having a cat is bad for your health." That's when I knew that her so-called "for your own good" wasn't really for my good, but rather her selfish excuse. Or perhaps it was another way for her to torture me. After all, that was her way. Whatever I liked she hated. When I was happy she would make trouble. Just as we arrived at the Liu house, we saw Mrs. Elizabeth already standing at the mansion's entrance. Victoria had informed her in advance that I would be coming, so Mrs. Elizabeth had already prepared a room on the 2nd floor. She looked at me tenderly and asked, "Sincere, this will be your room from now on. Do you like it?" I stared at this room where I had lived for so long in my previous life and froze for a moment. Then, expressionlessly, I shook my head. I was no longer the same Sincere who yearned for parental affection from my previous life. So I said, "Mrs. Elizabeth, this was your biological son's room, right? There are many of his old belongings here, and you've preserved them well. I can see how much you cherish these things. If I stay in this room, I might accidentally damage these items, and that would surely upset you. I noticed there are guest rooms downstairs. I'll stay in one of those." Mrs. Elizabeth looked at me, wanting to say something, but was interrupted by Victoria, who said, "Mom, if Sincere wants to stay downstairs, let's just have the maid prepare a room for him." I looked at Victoria, who had spoken up for me. She probably didn't know that my main reason for not wanting to stay on the second floor was because her bedroom was right next door. In my previous life, before Victoria's engagement, we were actually quite close and loving. Once, during university, Mrs. Elizabeth asked me, "Sincere, what kind of daughter-in-law would you like in the future?" After pondering for a moment, just as I was about to speak, Victoria hung onto my arm and whined, "Brother naturally likes someone like me, right? Right?" I smiled helplessly and played along. All right, I'll find someone just like my sister then." This casual joke later became evidence of me drugging my own sister. Every time I tried to explain, "I didn't drug you," Victoria would grip my arm and retort, "You used to say you liked me for so many years, and then even resorted to drugging me to force me to marry you. How can you deny it now?" Perhaps because I was back in this mansion, that night I dreamed of things from my previous life. During the final period of my life, the doctor said, "It's not good for you to stay alone like this. Call your family and friends to keep you company." I replied, "I have no family." As for friends, my best friend used to be Victoria's fiancé, Ethan. It wasn't until the 5th year of my marriage to Victoria that Ethan returned to the country. One night, Victoria and many old friends held a welcome party for him. Someone deliberately recorded a video at the party and sent it to me. The two of them were passionately kissing in a corner. I watched that few-second video repeatedly all night. That same night, I made up my mind to ask her for a divorce. She bit her lip and asked why. I showed her the video and said, "Victoria, I know you married me because you had no choice. But now Ethan has returned, and it seems he's still willing to accept you. So let's divorce and each find our own happiness." Actually, before this, I had proposed divorce to Victoria multiple times, but was always refused. I thought with Ethan's return, she would agree this time. But Victoria, like a madwoman, tore up the divorce agreement I had prepared and hysterically argued with me, demanding that I take responsibility for her for life. A voice suddenly came through, "Sincere? Brother, are you all right?" I suddenly awoke and reflexively slapped the person in front of me. The young Victoria looked at me, her eyes showing a hurt expression. She said, "I heard you talking in your sleep, sounding very angry, so I came to check on you." After saying this, she turned to leave, only turning back at the door to say, "Mom's calling you for breakfast. We'll be late for school if we don't hurry." Just like in my previous life, the Liu family transferred me to Victoria's school. When they saw me walking into the classroom with her, someone asked her, "Victoria, who is he?" Victoria seriously introduced me, saying, "This is Sincere, currently staying with our family." Thinking back to my previous life, before the drugging incident, whenever Victoria introduced me to others, she would always happily say, "This is my brother Sincere." Looking at Victoria, who was just one step away from me, I suddenly realized she seemed different from the Victoria in my memories. She wasn't like the teenage Victoria from my previous life, nor like the Victoria who later tormented and sought revenge on me. My heart skipped a beat as I suddenly thought of something. I called out, "Victoria!" Just as I was about to voice my doubts to Victoria, someone called her name at the same time, "Victoria." Victoria glanced at me, then looked behind me. I also turned around. The person calling her from the classroom door was Ethan. He said, "Victoria, wait for me after school. I have something to tell you." After speaking, Ethan finally noticed me standing beside Victoria. His gaze towards me was unfriendly, and after sizing me up competitively, he said, "So you're the guy staying with the Liu family." Since he was my best friend in my previous life, I could immediately sense Ethan's obvious hostility towards me the moment he looked at me. This was completely different from my previous life. In my previous life, when Ethan learned I was Victoria's brother, he was very happy, calling me Brother Sincere and bringing me into his social circle. But now, his attitude towards me was more like the last time I saw him in my previous life. During that unpleasant meeting, I asked him, "The security footage shows only you and I entered Victoria's room that day. I didn't drug her, so was it you?" At that time, I couldn't understand why he, who liked Victoria so much, would ruin their engagement party. Victoria answered for me, "His name is Sincere, not that guy." Ethan looked at me, gave a perfunctory smile, and didn't say anything more. Afterwards, while sitting in my seat, I noticed Ethan frequently glancing at me. Even though I found it strange, I had to ignore him and force myself to focus on the class. In my previous life, I wasn't a good student, but Mrs. Elizabeth didn't mind my poor grades. In fact, the worse I did, the happier she seemed to be. She would always say, "Sincere is becoming more and more like Asa, her deceased son." He never liked studying either. Parents' love for their children makes them plan far ahead, but what mother would hope their son would just be a wastrel? In the end, she never truly saw me as her son. To her, I was probably just a substitute for comfort. This life I didn't want to be like before, spending the first half of my life as someone else's son's substitute and the second half living in misery until death. So studying was my only way out. But studying wasn't easy either. After realizing I really couldn't understand the knowledge in these textbooks, I stood up somewhat frustrated. Victoria, who had been chatting with her friends, noticed my movement and turned to ask, "Where are you going?" I impatiently replied, "Bathroom." In my memory, this high school had very few bathrooms, and there was always a queue during breaks. But today, surprisingly, I didn't see anyone. It wasn't until I pushed open the bathroom door that I realized something was wrong. Inside, several students almost simultaneously turned to look at me. The closest to me was Ethan. He dropped his cigarette, looked at the student they had pinned down covered in dirty water, then walked towards me, saying with a smile, "Just playing around with him. You won't tell Victoria, right?" Looking at the cigarette butt on the ground, I suddenly realized I had never really understood Ethan. Otherwise, how could I not know that he smoked during school and bullied classmates? After thinking for a moment, I said, "I'm not that close with Victoria." "Is that so?" Although Ethan asked this, his expression had notably softened. He asked, "Aren't you staying at her house?" I met his gaze directly and replied, "Just staying there, but we're not close." Ethan nodded and said, "That's good." After saying this, he quickly left with his group. Only after everyone left did I look at the boy on the ground, but quickly withdrew my gaze and walked into a stall. When I came out, the boy was standing by the mop sink with his back to me. He had nothing on his upper body and was trembling as he washed his originally soaked shirt under the tap. Perhaps hearing the sound of me opening the door, he quickly wrung out his shirt and put it on, then hurriedly ran towards the exit with his head down. As he passed by me, I suddenly reached out and stopped him. The boy looked up at me puzzled, and I looked at him too. After a long silent stare, I finally remembered his name was Adrian. I took off my jacket and threw it to him, saying, "Your shirt's wet. Wear mine." Adrian lowered his head again and refused. "No need." I said, "Wearing a wet shirt is a small matter, but catching a cold and affecting your grades is a big deal." My words made Adrian purse his lips, hesitating for a while before finally accepting my jacket. Seeing Adrian change into the clothes, I secretly sighed in relief. Actually, I'm not someone who likes to meddle in others' affairs. In my previous life, just a few days after I transferred, Adrian committed suicide by jumping off the building. The school's explanation was that it was due to family issues and academic pressure. But now it seems that perhaps the reasons for his suicide weren't so simple. 4 years later, after graduating with our bachelor's degrees, Adrian and I didn't choose to pursue graduate studies. We started our own business. I sold the expensive watch Victoria had given me, which became the seed money for our startup. With good luck and some memories from my previous life, Adrian and I managed to make the company flourish. I met Victoria again at a bidding venue. Over these years, I had heard some gossip about her and Ethan. They divorced shortly after marriage. Initially, Ethan refused to divorce and even physically abused her. When Mr. William found out, he brought up old grievances and used every means to send Ethan to prison. Only then did this pair of bitter couples finally divorce. After the bidding ended, Victoria caught up with me in the parking lot. She stood there awkwardly and after much hesitation only managed to say, "I'm sorry, Sincere." I glanced at her and said, "If you're really sorry, then withdraw from the bidding." Victoria paused, then actually agreed. "Okay." Even so, I wouldn't take it seriously. There's no father-son relationship in business, let alone our kind of relationship. I briefly explained today's bidding situation to Adrian on the phone. Adrian sighed and asked, "The Liu family is involved too. Does that mean we have no chance?" I said, "Not necessarily. The fact that the Liu family is competing with companies like ours that were only established a few years ago only shows that they're really declining. Just wait. We're sure to win this one." A few days later, the bid results were as I predicted. I turned around contentedly, preparing to call Adrian, but saw Victoria standing not far behind me. Sunlight shone through the glass windows. I stood in the light while Victoria was shrouded in shadows cast by the wall a few steps away. She forced a slight smile and said, "Congratulations." The corners of my mouth flattened somewhat, feeling only annoyance that I had to encounter such a person on such a good day. But Victoria didn't seem to feel this way. She continued softly, "You asked me to withdraw from the bidding last time, and I did." I frowned impatiently and asked, "What? Are you here to collect a favor?" She looked panicked, her body trembling slightly as she said, "No, it's not like that. Sincere, I just wanted to see you, to talk to you. I just wanted to tell you that I'm willing to do anything you ask." After thinking for a moment, I asked, "Really anything?" She nodded. "Yes, I'm willing to do whatever you ask." I smiled and said, "All right then, would Miss Liu please just stop appearing in front of me from now on? Can you do that?" After saying this, I left. After walking a few steps, I still couldn't help but look back. I saw Victoria leaning against the wall, trembling as she swallowed several pills. She noticed my gaze and forced another slight smile at me, hiding her hand with the medicine behind her back. Her eyes suddenly lit up as if seeing light. Actually, she didn't need to hide it. I didn't care whether she was sick or not, and I had no interest in knowing what medicine she was taking. I just plainly expressed my true thoughts. "To be honest, Victoria, I wanted to tell you to go die. But I know you definitely wouldn't want to do that, so just don't appear in front of me anymore. That way, I can pretend you're already dead." After saying this, I didn't linger any longer. The glass in the hall reflected her image, crouched on the ground, covering her face as she cried like a heap of melted filth. While discussing projects with Adrian, he mentioned the Liu family in passing, and I realized it had been a long time since I'd seen Victoria. She seemed to have truly disappeared. I recalled that the last time I heard news about her was a year ago. That day, a business partner mentioned she was ill, saying, "Who knew depression could be so frightening? The Liu family's young lady is really ruined. She was perfectly fine before, then suddenly fell ill, hiding in her house all day, refusing to see people. Mrs. Elizabeth even invited Taoist priests to perform rituals at her house. She's like someone possessed by a ghost. Can't see light, can't see people, gets triggered at the slightest stimulation." A voice called out, "Sincere?" Adrian patted my shoulder and asked, "What are you thinking about?" I smiled and shook my head, returning my thoughts to work. How Victoria ended up didn't matter to me. I only knew that I was doing well. I had friends, a career, and that was enough. Everything I wanted in my previous life had been fulfilled in this one. I often marvel that heaven truly favored me.